In many ways, bananas are the simple ones because while other fruits like grapes can only grow in certain cooler climates, typically found a decent distance from the equator, and can't grow in winter, therefore dictating a specific harvest period starting in late summer and ending in late fall, which makes extending availability year-round challenging. And while other fruit is just inherently seasonal like apples that require moderate enough temperatures during their growing season and cold winter weather to stimulate flower buds, so they need to grow in places with distinct seasons and always harvest in fall, making year-round supply. Unnatural bananas, on the other hand, don't require seasonality since they grow in warm tropical climates, and warm tropical climates are found in the tropics, which flank the equator, meaning they experience little to no seasonal temperature swings, allowing for year-round harvest. But the only problem is that the tropics only encompass 47 degrees of latitude, yet there are 133 other degrees, nearly all of which are filled with people who want bananas, and specifically fresh bananas, year-round. So the year-round production is simple, but the distribution is not, since each week all the banana plantations in Ecuador contracted to distribute with dole start their harvest on Tuesday or Wednesday, where dole doesn't do much growing itself in the country because most of it is done by thousands of small to mid-size independent plantations, and teams of 2 men head out into the fields to find fully grown bunches, where one cuts the stem with a machete and the other grabs it and places it onto their shoulder before carrying it to a nearby cableway system that stretches all throughout the plantation, then inserting foam padding between the banana hands for protection from bruising during transport, after which a mule pulls the train of bunches down the cableway to the central packing plant, where banana hands are cut from the bunch and tossed into a tank of soapy water for cleaning before being picked up by a worker on the other end, who arranges them on a tray sized to roughly correspond with the number needed to fill a box. But before packing, a waxy coating is painted onto the stems to cover the cut portion and slow the plant's emission of ethylene, the hormone that ripens fruit, since they specifically do not want the plant to turn yellow in transport. And in fact, if a banana turns yellow in the transport process, it will be rejected from import into the US, since it increases the risk of also including pests. But far before that, the bananas are packed into bags, which are packed into boxes, which are packed into a truck, which departs for the country's primary port city, Guayaquil. So on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, the streets of Guayaquil are clogged with hundreds upon hundreds of trucks laden with Dole-branded refrigerated containers, all destined for their dedicated facility at the city's southwest corner called Banana Puerto, which is quite rare, since most exporters contract with major multinational container shipping companies like Maersk or CMA and insert their cargo into their supply chain. But the traditional container supply chain doesn't really work for Dole or any banana exporter for that matter, because as a relatively small country, Ecuador doesn't see a ton of container ship traffic, and while it's not none, much of that capacity is headed to and from Asia rather than North America, meaning Dole would struggle to find frequent container capacity on this rather niche routing. And frequency, of course, matters a lot for fresh fruit export, since traditional exporters of non-perishable goods can just send a ton of product all at once when a ship happens to make the desired journey. But Dole needs a regular supply of bananas entering the US to keep shelves stocked with fresh product, and upping the challenge, bananas are shipped in refrigerated containers, which they don't necessarily need for preservation, but refrigeration slows the ripening process, so it's the only way to get the fruit to US ports in the required pre-ripe green state. While on traditional cargo ships, only a small portion of the thousands of container positions have the required hookups to power and monitor a refrigerated container, meaning Dole would have to work with just a portion of the capacity of the already limited supply. So instead, Dole operates its own cargo ships, where each Friday following the multi-day loading process, one of the 4 ships assigned to this route pulls away from the port of Guayaquil, snakes its way through the coastal estuary, and enters the open ocean before arriving 3 days later in Caldera, Costa Rica, where Dole also sources plenty of bananas and pineapples from the country, but faces a hurdle since the vast majority of Costa Rica's container cargo goes to and from its east coast via the port of Limon, while the country's largest Pacific port, Caldera, is comparatively tiny and not even equipped with traditional container cranes, making loading large volumes of cargo wildly inefficient, which further justifies Dole's ship ownership, since they have cranes built in on board, allowing them to operate in less developed ports common across small Latin American countries from which they source fruit. So following this stop, Dole's weekly Pacific route continues to Puerto Quetzal in Guatemala before arriving at its final destination of the port of San Diego on Sunday, 9 days after departure. And no More than 12 following harvest, which is strategic since San Diego is not a busy container port because the vast majority of inbound West Coast container traffic docks in Los Angeles and Long Beach, but operating to San Diego allows Dole to lease their own dedicated port facility at a relatively low cost, enabling high reliability of delivery each Sunday with low risk of port congestion, after which the process is more conventional as the vessel begins unloading its 45 million or so pieces of fruit, and following a customs and USDA inspection, long-haul trucks come in to fetch the containers, with the vast majority headed to grocery distribution centers like the Kroger facility in Las Vegas, where upon arrival a Kroger employee takes a sample of bananas from each pallet for inspection and sorts them into groups of similar ripeness before rolling batches into ripening rooms where ethylene gas is pumped in to speed the process along, after which distribution continues as normal with pallets broken down and reassembled, grouping bananas with other food bound for each Kroger store, which is certainly impressive considering bananas travel thousands of miles and end up sold at grocery stores just 2 weeks after harvest for a mere couple of dollars, making the year-round growing season primarily a logistics challenge, unlike apples, which harvest only in fall yet are sold year-round with more than 100 varieties grown and sold in the US and over 30 for commercial production in Washington alone, with 5 to 12 varieties for sale at any given store at any given time, and almost all marked USA, because apples are effectively the opposite of bananas, being diverse in variety but highly uniform in place of origin, since they're from New York, Michigan, or mostly Washington, where 60% of the US supply is grown, and they're the only fresh fruit sold every month of the year in the US, grown exclusively domestically, which on the surface makes logistics seem simple but actually hides complexity, since availability in spring 7 months after picking requires advanced storage techniques like controlled atmosphere rooms used by major growers such as Stemilk Growers, which owns 10,000 acres and employs thousands during harvest, while also marketing its own varieties, yet licenses the Cosmic Crisp apple developed by Washington State University as a proprietary variety harvested late with long shelf life that helps bridge supply gaps, yet still requires apples to be picked at specific ripeness tested for firmness, starch, and sugar, then stored in massive facilities like Stemilk's Fresh Cube, where controlled atmosphere conditions of near freezing temperatures and low oxygen stall ripening for months, with robotic pallet carriers moving fruit for efficient long-term storage before apples are reintroduced to the supply chain when demanded, which makes them available nationwide year-round, but only thanks to both biology and technology, while other fruits like grapes present another case, since they ripen quickly and are as ripe as they'll get once picked, yet Americans enjoy them year round thanks to sourcing from places like Chile's Valparaiso region, where producers like Santa Elena grow varieties, including proprietary ones like Autumn Crisp, developed by Sunworld International, with traits like long shelf life and late harvest, enabling export north through reefer containers shipped via Panama Canal to Philadelphia, which is uniquely suited as a produce gateway due to its infrastructure and proximity to population centers, and where grapes undergo inspections and fumigation before reaching consumers. Then Mexican grapes bridge the seasonal gap until California's Coachella and San Joaquin Valleys supply domestic demand in summer, making grapes a $2.1 billion industry, and another example of logistics shaping availability and taste, as consumers come to expect grapes like bananas and apples to be always on shelves, while fruits like peaches struggle since they bruise, easily ripen unpredictably, and don't store or transport well, so despite being beloved, they see much lower and declining consumption because supply chains can't deliver consistent quality, meaning Americans' diets are largely shaped by what logistics can provide, since bananas transport while apples store, while grapes source globally, but peaches and similar fruits remain seasonal, proving that supply chain dictates cuisine as much as culture.